Welcome to Rancho Camulos, where history has carefully preserved the original Mexican rancho that remains located in its original agricultural setting. With its colorful 180-year history, Rancho Camulos joins the original California missions as having some of the oldest surviving structures in the western United States. Still, as in the beginning, the rancho's lands are planted every year and harvest a variety of crops. Perhaps in no other place is it as easy to step back in time and understand early California life, when horses were the fastest transportation and the conveniences of a hospital, electricity, running water, and radio or television would have been beyond anyone's imagination. The history of Rancho Camulos starts in the early 1800s when Los Angeles was only a small, insignificant burg with fewer than 2,000 inhabitants, and California was still a part of Mexico. In 1839, the Mexican governor, Juan Alvarado, granted the well-connected Del Valle family an enormous parcel of land.
That's how the Del Valles got this property. It was a 48,000 acre portion of land that was given to Antonio Del Valle in 1839 for his services to the Mexican Army. He was my great-great-great-great-grandfather, and he gave the portion that came to his son Ignacio is the portion we're on right now. It's Rancho Camulos. And it's about 1,800 acres, more or less. That's what Ignacio got initially, and it is still approximately 1,800 acres. The first people that ever lived on this property were the Tataviam, the Native Americans who were, actually, they were not Chumash like everybody expects the California Native Americans to be. They traded with the Chumash. The Chumash were right down the road. Many of the Tataviam, or some anyway, of the Tataviam stayed on and worked on the ranch. And actually, I think they made the adobe bricks that made the adobe that we are sitting in right now. We are a National Historic Landmark, the only one in Ventura County, one of only, there's only about 2,500 in the whole United States. So it's a big deal. And the reasons, the main reasons why we're a National Historic Landmark are the agriculture here, the Catholic Church, and then the real kicker, the real reason, is the novel Ramona that was written by Helen Hunt Jackson.
The book was published and republished and republished and republished, and I don't know how many versions were ultimately published of Ramona, but it remained highly popular in the, it was published first in 1884, but in the 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, there were several films. There was a film in 1910, and then actually a couple of them in the 1910s. There was one in the 1920s. There was another one in the 1930s. And so it remained a popular subject by now, not only through books, but through the silver screen. And the first film, the first time it was put on silver nitrate was in 1910. And the 1910 version of Ramona, which is only about 17 minutes or so, was directed by D.W. Griffith, starred Mary Pickford, and it was filmed mostly right here at Rancho Camulos, right here on the grounds of Rancho Camulos Museum, also in the hills surrounding us.
She was a fictional character, but we are the home of Ramona. So the Ramona seekers came in droves. We had a railroad station out in front, a stagecoach stop as well, and they would get off the train and want to meet Ramona.
Then the Southern Pacific Railroad, which came out here beginning in 1887, stopped at Camulos. There was a very small train station there. And so they would bring people who would want to see Camulos. They would promote Camulos as Ramona's home. And people would come on the grounds and and want to be able to see Ramona, so the Del Valle family kind of played along with it. And they were real excited about it, I guess, some of the time, unless it became overrun. But they even had created one of the bedrooms as Ramona's room. And there were streets named Ramona, schools named Ramona, unusual places, postcards sent Ramona's place, just everything you could think of. It was such a phenomenon.
The tourist boom had started in Southern California with the book Ramona. The Del Valle family held on to their property until about 1924, when they decided to sell. They sold to Mr. August Ruble. Couldn't have sold to a better person. He raised his children here knowing that it was a piece of California history. I think that's why it's a museum today. They truly believe that. He made improvements. He put in driveways and brick walkways. He built the schoolhouse, which was a fabulous addition to the property. And a very modern building in 1930, but he made it look just like it belonged. It fit in perfectly.
The man who bought it then, August Ruble, he had kids and they had kids, and so now his grandchildren are the people who manage the whole ranch, and they also have a couple of representatives on the museum board.
My grandfather is sitting at a desk in the portrait behind us, and evidently that is how he wanted to be remembered. I guess Camulos Ranch was up for sale by the Del Valles. And so he took a look at it, took a look at what was going on here. At the time it had walnuts, oranges, apricots on it, and he bought it and really went in for oranges. My grandmother, Mary Ruble, who you can see in the portrait over my shoulder, was in her relationship with children in an era when children were seen and not heard, from my perspective, was very strict, but loving. My earliest memories at Rancho Camulos include just running around the gardens here, learning to skate out here on the hallway outside these doors, crashing and scraping my knees on the sidewalks around the schoolhouse, grazing and eating fruit in the family orchard across from the south lawn, playing all kinds of ball and, games out there on the yard. My grandmother, when we were visiting here, she did not believe that children belonged indoors. And so we were only allowed to come inside when it was lunchtime or nap time. And you had nap time whether you slept or not. And otherwise, you had to be outside. And it was wonderful. I loved it. We ran around and played all kinds of things. You have to understand, having European roots and having a sense of preserving history, which his family definitely has, just totally, thoroughly inculcated into that family. And so when he gets here and he is, according to some sources, the albino who is buying Camulos, he, in his attempt to bridge that cultural and racial divide, promised to preserve and preserve the history here. And that was a very sincere promise. And he instilled that in all of his children, to the point that then my mother, she was like 16 when he was killed in the war, but she never lost that. She was passionate about preserving this place, and that's why we're sitting here now. One of the reasons Rancho Camulos is so well preserved is because of my mother's promise to her father, August, as he was going off to World War II. She was 16 years old at a boarding school in Massachusetts, and she never saw him again. And one of the last things he asked her to do was to preserve Rancho Camulos. And so she lived out her life after the earthquake doing just that, preserving it to the best of her ability.
The grounds and most of the buildings that compose Rancho Camulos Museum are open to the public. The rancho structures suffered severe damage in the 1994 Northridge earthquake. Most of this damage has been repaired except for the brick-walled winery, which was built in 1867. This building has not yet been restored and is one of the few places on the property closed to visitors. The main adobe began its life in 1853 as a much smaller L-shaped four-room house. It has been expanded several times, eventually reaching its current U-shaped configuration with over 10,000 square feet and 20 rooms. Today, it remains one of few surviving Mexican-era adobe buildings in California. The fountain dates back from 1853 and provided water for cooking, household chores, and bathing. The chapel was built for Señora del Valle in the 1860s. A visiting priest would conduct weekly mass for Del Valles and their workers. The barn, gas station, and bunkhouse were built about 1920. The Del Valles Grape Arbor was recently rebuilt by volunteers. The original arbor provided shade for outdoor meals. Brides made their way through the opening of the arbor to the nearby chapel. The 1920 adobe at the front of the property now houses the museum's research center and library. It is of Spanish colonial revival style and was once occupied by the ranch manager. It currently houses the rancho's archives and artifact collection. The schoolhouse, constructed in 1930, is a lone structure built by the Ruble family and served their children, as well as those of the rancho's bookkeeper. Today, it is often used to host events. Constructed recently by volunteers, the carriage house contains the Del Valles family's horse-drawn carriage from the 1800s, which has been restored by a museum volunteer. The most recent construction is a small representation of a Tataviam Indian village, which was built in 2019 by the Fernando Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, descendants of the Native American people who once lived and worked at Camulos.
And I think history really grounds people, especially during difficult times like we're going through the pandemic right now. But we know from the past that people are resilient and they face a lot of different crises, whether it's war or drought or famine, fires, whatever. But here at Rancho Camulos, you get a sense that life is going to go on. It's been around for a long time, and it gives people here a sense of purpose to keep it going. And I really do want to pay credit to our wonderful, wonderful volunteers. We would not be here without them, whether it's working on our research library, the Native American village, conducting our school tours, the carriage house. Most recently, we've been rebuilding our grape arbor. So many ways for people to get involved. And I have a completely newfound appreciation for nonprofits and for people who volunteer and give back to the community and to others. And I feel so fortunate to work with these people. They are truly amazing and inspiring. I get goosebumps thinking about them. They just really are magnificent. And this museum would not be what it is today without those people. And I often think of this place as the little museum that could. And because we don't have a lot of financial resources and there's challenges all the time here, whether it's buildings falling down or leaking roofs or whatever, but we have people that really pitch in and help us.
The book Ramona paints what is perhaps the best picture of life at Rancho Camulos in the 1800s, during the Del Valle era.
Senora Moreno's house was one of the best specimens to be found in California of the representative house of the half-barbaric, half-elegant, wholly generous, and free-handed life, led there by Mexican men and women of degree in the early part of this century under the rule of the Spanish and Mexican viceroys. It was a picturesque life, with more of sentiment and gaiety in it more also that 6 was truly dramatic, more romance than will ever be seen again on those sunny shores. The aroma of it all lingers there still. Industries and inventions have not yet slain it. It will last out its century. In fact, it can never be quite lost, so long as there is left standing one such house.
I think that anybody who comes to Rancho Camulos Museum would hope that it will continue to stay this way for another 100 years, another 200 years. It's kind of a miracle that the museum exists today the way it does. You know, most places were sold off, most places were developed into homes.
It's a style of living that the city people today have never experienced.
Camulos captures the tapestry of the history of California. We go through all the stages, we are part of all the stages of California history. And most importantly, today when you visit, it's not very different from what it was like over 100 years ago.
It's important for children to understand their history here in California, the Latino history and the Anglo history. And this place embodies both of those. It's on the map because of a fictional book that was written in the 1880s. But that book became a great American novel. It's interesting to me that the history of Rancho Camulos is not just actual history, it's also fictional history. And California is all about both of those. And so it really embodies, it's a snapshot of all that California was and continues to be.